This is a video for Edexcel B1 Biology for GCSE. This is a video for topic 2. So it's talking about responses to a changing environment. So it's both like humans and plants. So it starts talking about homeostasis and the regulation of water, sugar and temperature. And then moves on to the area of plant hormones and how plants regulate certain aspects of their lives as well, focusing specifically on like plant hormones. Right, so let's get stuck straight into this. So if we start with homeostasis, the definition of that is the process of maintaining a stable internal environment, as that process of maintaining that constant stable internal environment. And there's three main areas that the exam boards like to look at. That's osmoregulation, so that's water; thermoregulation, that's temperature; and blood glucose regulation, so that's important for people with diabetes. That's just keeping your glucose level fairly constant. Osmoregulation, so that's getting a balance between the water gained via food and drink and respiration compared to what you're losing through sweat, urine and breath. Thermoregulation is the removal of excess body heat when you're too hot, but retaining heat when it's too cold. They work on this idea of negative feedback, which you need to have a good grasp of. So that helps to maintain these in the body. So when something is wrong, your body tells you that something is wrong. So change in the environment, trigger response that counters this change. So something's wrong, you're too hot. So therefore a change is made to cool back down again. If the internal environment changes too much, it might not be possible to actually respond to that change. Right, so let's get into body temperature first. Body temperature is controlled by the hypothalamus. Okay, it's important that body temperature is kept about 37 degrees C because many of the enzymes in the body work best at this temperature. So most of the chemical reactions that take place inside the body rely on 37 degrees C. The hypothalamus uses receptors around the body to detect temperature, and the response happens in the skin, the dermis, if a change is required. So the diagram to the left shows a negative feedback graph for temperature when it gets too hot and too cold. So if it gets too hot, vasodilation happens, brings the temperature down. If it gets too cold, vasoconstriction and shivering happens. So it gets it back to the set point of 37 degrees. Sweating happens when it gets too hot as well. We know this idea. Right. So too hot. The first thing that happens is the erector muscles relax, so the hairs lay flat. Okay. Lots of sweat is produced, which evaporates, transferring heat from your skin to the surroundings, cooling it down. The sebaceous glands also release large amounts of sebum when it's hot, making the hair oily, so that makes it oily. Okay, the blood vessels close to the skin dilate, they widen. These blood vessels, they widen so that the blood can cool down more. Okay, so blood flows near to your skin, that transfers more heat to the surroundings, cooling you down. So that's called vasodilation. If you're too cold, the erector muscles contract, so that stands the hair up. That means that air is trapped, acting as an insulator, keeping you warm. Hardly any sweat is produced, so there's not much evaporation taking place. The blood vessels close, they constrict. That allows less blood flow, so you won't lose as much heat. Right, so hormones are chemical messengers. We're going to talk about nerves as well as part of this. By the way, we'll get on to the other two parts of homeostasis later on. Hormones are chemical messengers that travel around the blood to activate certain cells, and they call those cells target cells. They're produced in something called the endocrine system, so the endocrine gland, and they're released directly into the blood. So these are chemicals that are released into the blood. Anything to do with nerves or neurons is electrical. So the blood carries these hormones all over the body, and they only affect particular target cells. The target cells, the right receptors respond to that hormone. It's quite a slow process when you think about it. Neurons, their nerve cells, transmit information as electrical impulses around the body. That's really quick. They send these signals very, very quick around the body. Neurons have branched endings, so they're called dendrons, and they connect to other neurons. The electrical impulse travels along the axon, that's the main part of it over here, and it's insulated by this myelin sheath, which speeds up that electrical signal and also stops them from being lost. These neurons are long, which is better than having lots of little neurons, because therefore the impulse can go up and down quicker. If there are lots of little ones, the impulse will slow down. The connection between two neurons is called a synapse. So that's what we have here. Here's one neuron, here's another neuron. That gap over there is called a synapse. And here's a neurotransmitter that's going between the two. So what happens, you have an electrical signal come in, the neurotransmitters are chemical as a chemical, so therefore it transfers across the gap in a chemical way and is picked up again as an electrical signal on the other side. So differences between hormones and nerves are fast, hormones are slow, nerves act for a short amount of time in a precise area, while hormones act for a long amount of time in a more general area, and nerves transmit electrical messages, while hormones are chemical messengers. Right, let's keep going. So the structure of the nervous system. The nervous system has a very sort of specific structure to it, and you need to get your head around what's going on. You've got the dendrons that pick up a chemical signal from another neuron and convert it into an electrical signal. The axons conduct the electrical signal. I remember that's insulated by myelin sheath. Central nervous system, so here's the actual structure of it, contains the brain and the spinal cord and are linked to sense organs by nerves. The stimulation of receptors in sense organs sends electrical impulses along neurons. The 5 sense organs are ears, eyes, nose, tongue and the skin. And the sensory neurons have long dendrons and short axons that carry nerve impulses from the receptors to the sense organs to the central nervous system. Relay neurons have short dendrons and axons carry impulses from sensory neurons to the motor neurons. You don't need to know about which ones are short or which ones are long. I've never seen a question asked about that. The motor neurons have many short dendrons and one long axon to carry a nerve impulse from the central nervous system to effectors. Okay, so I'll go through this process in a second as we tie it into what's happening here. Reflexes are automatic responses. Just when you respond automatically to a certain stimulus. So, I don't know, putting your finger on something that's sharp. Your body responds to that. So the route the impulse travels to the receptor, from the receptor to the effector is called a reflex arc. Reflexes are quicker than normal responses, and you don't have to think about the response. This diagram below shows a reflex arc, but I've moved it to the side of here to make it easy to see. So this is a reflex arc, but I'll explain what happens if it's a normal reflex as well, a normal response. So this is a reflex. You get pain in your finger because you touch something sharp. It's sent along the sensory neuron, okay, to the spinal cord. It hits a relay neuron, which carries the impulse from the sensory neuron to a motor neuron. So the central nervous system realizes this is a reflex. I don't need to think about this, just do it. It then sends it from the relay neuron to the motor neuron. The motor neuron sends it to a muscle, an effector, and that has an effect, essentially contract your arm. So that could be a gland, so it could be send out this hormone. So you have receptor, sensory neuron, relay neuron, motor neuron, effector. If this was a normal response, when it got to the central nervous system, it would go all the way up the spinal cord, all the way to the brain. The brain would decide what to do and then come back down again. And then it will go to the motor neuron. So we don't have that response of going to the brain if it's a reflex. So you can easily investigate the density of nerves at different parts of the body using a hairpin. So most of you guys have done this experiment. Sorry, at my school anyway. And so we can pair, you have one person blindfolded and another person has sort of like a hairpin, and you poke to see whether they can feel 1 or 2 pins, and where they feel 2 pins at a closer distance, that means there's a greater density of receptors, and where the distance is far apart before they feel 2 pins, the density of receptors is lower. So let's get into insulin and diabetes. So the hormone insulin, the hormones insulin and glucagon help to control the levels of glucose in the blood. If you were to eat food containing a larger amount of carbohydrate, that will eventually break down to sugar, so it will increase your blood sugar level, your blood glucose level. Normal metabolism, so it's a point I need to stress. Normal metabolism removes this. Vigorous exercise would help to remove any excess glucose. The blood glucose level is controlled using feedback loop shown on the right. So I'm going to go through that here step by step. If there's too much glucose in the blood, insulin is secreted. Too much glucose, insulin is released. And that comes from the pancreas. This insulin causes the glucose to be removed from the blood and stored in the liver. So stored there as glycogen, not to be confused with the hormone glucagon. So it makes glucose into glycogen stored in the liver. Insulin does that. And by increasing the uptake of glucose and by increasing the uptake of glucose in cells, that's also what happens. So the cells will take in more glucose, there's less glucose in the blood. After that, there's less glucose in the blood, no more insulin released. However, if you don't have enough sugar in the blood, glucagon is released by the pancreas, and that turns this glycogen back into glucose into the blood. That raises the blood sugar level and therefore allows you to keep doing what you're doing. So insulin turns glucose into glycogen. Glucagon turns glycagon into glucose. I'm going to say that again. Yeah, it's tricky. So insulin turns glucose into glycogen. Glucagon turns glycogen into glucose. That's what happens. One happens if you've got too much glucose in your body. That's when insulin comes out. One happens when you've got not enough glucose in your body. That's when glucagon comes out. So there's two types of diabetes that you need to know about. There's type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is where there's no or little insulin produced by the pancreas. This means that your blood sugar level can raise to dangerous levels. So two ways of controlling it is avoid foods that are rich in carbohydrates or injecting insulin at meal times. You can also have tablets, insulin tablets. The insulin needs to be injected into fatty tissue, and the amount of insulin depends upon the person's diet and also how active they are. Type 2 diabetes is where the pancreas doesn't produce enough insulin, or the person is resistant to insulin. So in other words, so this is the main part of it, it's where they're resistant to insulin. It means the insulin goes into them and doesn't do anything at all. It cannot actually break down the glucose. They're just resistant to that. So it's normally related to BMI and the body mass index. That's where mass and height are included to calculate the BMI. So that can only be controlled by having a healthy diet or regular exercise and losing some weight. Some people that have type 2 can have medication or diabetes, but it generally doesn't make the biggest difference. Type 2, generally, your body can't actually break down that glucose with insulin, so you need to exercise it out and eat less of it. Type 1, it means you're not making enough insulin. Therefore, you need to replace it in your body by taking tablets or having an injection of it. Right, plant hormones. So we'll talk about plant hormones, plant hormone experiment, and then that is the end of topic 2. Right, so plant hormones. Some tricky words in here again. The whole of this section of biology is full of tricky words, so I'm going to highlight a few of these. I'm just going to find it with my pen. There we go. So plants respond to a stimuli, so in other words light or gravity or moisture, by regulating their growth. These are called tropisms. So there's one called phototropism. That's the growth of a plant responds to light. Okay, so if it's phototropic, it grows towards light. Phototropic is towards light. Right, gravitropism, also known as geotropism, is the growth of a plant response to gravity. Roots are positively gravitropic, so in other words they're growing towards gravity, therefore they grow down. Here's the plant hormone. It's called an auxin. Auxin is a plant hormone that stimulates the plant tips, shoots and roots to grow. So that's the thing that causes shoots, roots and tips to grow. It is produced just behind the tips and causes it to grow longer. So if the tip is removed, no auxin is produced and the shoots will stop growing. High concentrations of auxin inhibit growth in roots. So if there's lots of an auxin in the root, it stops the root growing. Roots will bend downwards and shoots will bend towards light when more auxin is produced on one side of the root or shoot. The response allows the plants to be better anchored or to absorb more sunlight. So better anchored for roots, absorb more sunlight for shoots and tips. So gibberellin is a hormone that stimulates plant stems to grow. It stimulates seed germination, stem growth and flowering. Okay. So you have an area of cell elongation on the opposite side of growth. So auxins released on the dark side of the shoot. So the auxins are released on this side, you get cell elongation, okay, and therefore it's getting longer. If the tip of a shoot was removed and placed on one side of the shoot, okay, the side of the shoot would grow faster than the other side. That's greater cell elongation. To cut the tip off, you place it on one side, that side grows faster because it's getting greater auxins on that side. Okay. So there's uses of plant hormones. So there's weed killers to disrupt normal growth of patterns of weeds in killing them. There's growing from cuttings and using rooting powder. This is where cutting is taken from the plant, dipped in the root hormone powder and then allowed to grow. So this quickly leads to clones of the original plant. Ripening fruits. So fruits can be picked while unripe and then ripened using these hormones. So while they're being transported to shops. And seedless fruits. So growth hormones are applied to unpollinated flowers, causing them to grow without seeds. And that is the end of the topic 2 video on responses to a changing environment.